Good morning, everyone. For most of us, feeding our families is not a pressing concern. For our kids, the concept of deprivation is about whether they've got the latest iPhone or not. I think, though, for most of us, seeing images of hungry children on TV or riots over food is concerning. We might pause, stop, wonder why it's happening. And then I think we go back to whatever we were doing. We might remind our kids how lucky they are, but ultimately we accept these images as just the way of the world. And there's a sense that there's nothing that we can do about it. It's just the way things are. Well, actually, things are getting a whole lot worse. And what I want to do today is describe to you a little bit about what I've learnt about food security since joining GrainCorp. Because I've really come to realise that while a lot of us are sitting around here today operating at the top end of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, self-actualising, thinking about whether to get our nails painted tomorrow or not, there are actually a lot of people out there for whom just the preoccupation of getting enough to eat is what consumes them. I'd like to try to think about how we can shift from being in the stands on this issue and seeing this as just the way it is, to being really on the playing field. So let me talk firstly a little bit about food security. What is food security? It's a term really that we've been hearing a lot more about only in recent times, really the last 5 or 6 years that it's become commonplace. And that is for one pretty simple, overwhelming reason. About 2006 it was that the US government mandated the production of ethanol from corn. Now, at the time they did that for very good reasons. It was about reducing the US's reliance on imported oil and also lessening the need to use nasty additives that tend to get put in to produce gasoline. So very, very sensible move. And it was one that was greeted actually with a lot of enthusiasm at the time by the media and many in the community. It was seen as something that would reduce America's dependence on other countries in the world and also the right thing to do for the environment. But what people didn't really appreciate at the time was just the huge impact that this would have on food and the production of food. And let me explain a little bit why. Many of you might be aware that corn is actually a key grain that's used for feeding animals. So poultry, pigs, beef, fish consume a lot of corn. And of course, as the world's population grows and as our living standards rise, people are shifting to consuming protein, and protein is very grain and very corn intensive, and let me show you. So that chart summarises for you just how many kilograms of grain it takes to produce a kilogram of protein, and you can see for beef there, we're talking 8 kilograms of grain. So the impact of diverting this huge amount of corn to produce ethanol, and now 40% of the US crop of corn goes into ethanol, combined with this dramatic increase in the need for corn and grain to feed animals, is producing enormous strain. And that's what we call the food versus fuel debate, essentially. It's tempting to think that market forces might sort this out. They sort out a lot of things. And certainly here in Australia, it's easy just to be pretty oblivious to this because in Australia we have a massive export surplus when it comes to food. Last year, as far as wheat goes, we exported 70% of the wheat crop. But we are reaching a tipping point because we're coming up against the finite resources around land and water that the world has. We know that the world's population is increasing around about 1% per annum, which doesn't actually sound like a lot, but if you think about it, it's adding another Germany or another Ethiopia, however you want to look at it, to the world's population every year. At the same time, we don't have any more arable land particularly to speak of. And in fact, if you look from 1960 to 2050, and I'll illustrate here for you on a chart, we're going to see a dramatic drop, a halving, in fact, of the amount of arable land available per capita of population. So what does that mean? It means that crop yields must increase, and quite dramatically, if we're to fill the gap. But unfortunately, what we're seeing on crop yields is that the rate of improvement in yields has slowed quite dramatically over recent years, and there's no turnaround in sight. In response to these kind of forces, what we're seeing now is some strange kind of behaviour. Governments are getting very concerned. Governments of food importing countries are concerned, and they're creating massive stockpiles of grain just in case. So the Saudi Arabian government is going to be creating 1.5 million tonnes worth of grain storage. I think Iraq is creating 1 million tonnes. Qatar are putting theirs in a radioactive proof bunker just in case of a nuclear war. And then, of course, you've got other countries like Russia and the Ukraine, Argentina, who just use export bans, further creating havoc. So what we see, of course, is a dramatic impact on food prices. And you can see from this chart just how dramatic it's been in the last 5 to 6 years, where we've gone from a situation of relatively stable prices for these basics that we've shown here to a period of very significant volatility and a very significant increase. And of course, what does that lead to? For poor countries and for poor people, when the price of staple foods go up, they drop typically the more luxurious, nutritious fruit and vegetables that they might have in their diet. They drop health, they drop education, they might even sell assets. And unsurprisingly, we see a significant increase in malnutrition and hunger. Against this, we have the bizarre situation where we have another phenomenon that's risen in the last 20 years. And the Red Cross did a study recently where they concluded there are now 925 million people who are hungry in the world. But believe it or not, there's 1.5 billion people in the world who are obese. So as they put it, too much nutrition is killing people faster than hunger in the world today. We also see massive waste going on. And we know in the US, for example, somewhere between 25% and 50% of the world's food, of the food in the US that's prepared for human consumption, is thrown out. Even in Australia, around about 5 billion every year is thrown out. That's more than it costs to run our army. So these are the kind of ingredients that we have that are creating these very, very real tensions around food security in our world today. And the bizarre situation that we have where we have more and more people competing for limited resources, more and more people dying of overeating, but more and more people stressed by a real lack of security around food. So what can we do about it? It is really important, I think, that we challenge ourselves to say, how can we shift from just being spectators on this to action? And it's something I've been really trying to challenge myself on hard over the last year, particularly since I've joined GrainCorp and have had this sort of first-hand involvement and exposure to the grains industry. I guess all of us in the room would probably earn over $45,000 a year, and that makes us amongst the top 1% richest people in the world. So we ought to be able to do something, shouldn't we? I'm trying to think about my opportunity for impact at 4 different levels. I think I have an opportunity as a leader in my industry in food and agriculture. I think I have another opportunity as a CEO of a company like GrainCorp. I think I have a third opportunity as a mother of 4 children. And I have an opportunity to make a difference also as an individual. Let me just talk a little bit about how I'm thinking about each of those, and maybe you might find some relevance in this for you. I hope so. So first of all, as a leader in food and agriculture, I think I have an opportunity to do a lot more than I have been doing in influencing government policy and really trying to get the focus on improving that productivity and yield in a way that's sustainable. So that's things like working with governments to figure out where our R&D priorities are, what infrastructure improvements we ought to be making, how can we continue the battle to free up world trade, how can we reconcile the issues around mining versus agriculture that are going on in our country at the moment. Just to talk about world trade for a little bit, because that's a really interesting one. This chart shows the level of subsidies that still go into agriculture today. And you can see there are many developed countries that subsidise their farmers to an extraordinary extent. This is a problem for Australian farmers, and we've been trying to get it removed. But it's even more of a problem for farmers in developing countries, because they're competing against first world farmers who are receiving up to 60% of their income, not from the price of selling their food, but via a cheque from the government. My second opportunity, as I said, is around my role as a CEO of GrainCorp. And GrainCorp is a really interesting company. Our core businesses are around grain, and particularly transporting grain and selling grain. And many of our customers are in the poorest countries of the world. Australian grain is sold into countries like Sudan, Yemen, Tanzania. And I've had the good fortune to visit these countries and see our customers firsthand. And when I first went, I went along with a commercial objective with the aim of developing our relationships and deepening them. But once I got there, I really saw firsthand and appreciated just how important Australian grain is to feeding the populations and to the social harmony even of those countries. And I also saw some of our customers, local companies, doing wonderful things. So really thinking long term, really thinking about the impact that they're having on the living standards of their country, and really thinking about their role in doing things like educating farmers, educating bakers, transforming and modernising the baking industry, and doing things that really are consistent with improving the economic well-being of their country. Coming back from that, our objectives have shifted very much to not only working with them in productive commercial ways, but really challenging ourselves to say, how can we work with these organisations to assist their social objectives as well? As a mother of 4 kids, the opportunity for me there is to make sure that my children grow up with sound values, appreciating the opportunities that they have and willing to help others, and willing to help others outside Australia. And that's tough because you want to naturally give your kids the best opportunities that you can. And sometimes that translates into what looks like a pretty privileged life, and it's pretty hard for them to really understand how fortunate they are. A couple of ideas. One thing that we've tried to do with our kids is get them to spend some time in third world countries, and I've actually got a photo here of Elliot. That's my son Elliot there with a little Ethiopian boy. He went when he was 13 to Ethiopia on a trip with the Hunger Project, and I think for him that really did open his eyes, and it has changed the way he's behaved since, and his sense of social obligation. It really opened his eyes to what it is to live in a poor country, what it is to be focused on just feeding and watering yourself, and also just how happy you can be without material possessions. That was another big insight for him. I've seen other families do a really nice job of involving their children in decision-making around what causes to support, getting their kids involved in making a case for different organisations and getting them involved actually in assisting those organisations in a way that goes beyond just handing over a cheque. As an individual, I think wiser people than me have counselled me that giving is something you should try to do and make a way of life, and try to do from an early stage. Not something to wait until you've paid off the mortgage and got done with all the school fees. which is tempting to do. And what's also hard, I think, as an individual sometimes is to know, who do I give to? There's so many good causes out there. What I've tried to do is think about the themes that I'm passionate about. Food security is definitely one of those. And then zero in on organisations who I think do an outstanding job in that particular theme and concentrate that way. So for me, the Hunger Project is a great organisation. I just put some quotes up there which does a much better job than I can of describing how the Hunger Project works. The Hunger Project has a strong Australian presence here. It works in many different countries, African countries, Indian countries, and makes a real difference. And its way of working is unique because it starts with transforming the beliefs about about a society and how it can make a difference. It works very closely with women because it believes that empowering women is the way to really drive change in a community. And importantly, it also works to a very clear exit plan. So its whole philosophy is around self-reliance and developing sustainable communities. So that's my particular passion. So I'll wrap up now. I hope that that's been of some help and provided you with some thought. My goals really were to paint a picture that really shows that food security is a huge challenge for us. It's not just more of the same that we see on TV. And to get you thinking a little bit about the different influences, the spheres of influence that you might have that go beyond just individual giving. If you're like me, you're operating at a fraction of your potential impact in terms of making a difference. And I think that in a global, interconnected world, our responsibility and our opportunity is not constrained by geography. The ripple effects of our actions translate all around the world. So let's make those actions positive. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alison.